Good morning. My name is Jim Durkin, State Representative of the 82nd District, also the House Republican Leader. Previously, I served as an Assistant Cook County State's Attorney at 26 in California, where I was assigned to the Narcotics Bureau and also the Felony Trial Division. I was also a former prosecutor with the Attorney General Office. In Illinois, and specifically Chicago, we are witnessing an unprecedented crime wave. Carjacking, smash and grabs, armed robberies, murders are all reaching new highs. The bad policies put in place by the governor and his Democrat allies in the General Assembly and a passive Cook County State's Attorney have created a consequence-free Illinois, which has only emboldened criminals. Myself and my Republican colleagues have repeatedly discussed the anti-police and anti-victim legislation signed into law by Governor Pritzker and his legislative cohorts. It has broken our criminal justice system. And while many of the perpetrators of violent crime are no longer being held accountable, there is a horrific consequence to each and every one of the victims. We must return to supporting the victims of crime rather than expanding the rights of criminals as the governor has done in his failed progressive public safety agenda. Today, I am here to give hope to the forgotten voices in our criminal justice system, the victims of crime. Those are the moms who were carjacked with their kids in the car, the brother chasing after justice for his murdered sister after the state's attorney said there wasn't a case. The parents who lose children to gunfire on a daily basis. It's their voice that should not be silenced and never forgotten. The despair and anguish felt by crime victims and the futility they experience seeking closure for the tragic and brutal loss of a family member, loved one, or friend can never be discounted. The pain and torment is being fueled even more by the decisions of Governor Pritzker's Prisoner Review Board. In Illinois, we have enshrined in our Constitution our obligation to protect victims of crime. But this administration is spectacularly failing these vulnerable and scarred citizens. Let me take some time to talk to you about three cases that I have recently researched and watched. Paul Bryant is one of the most violent criminals to come out of Cook County. He is a serial rapist and a murderer with a long history of violent crimes, including numerous convictions for home invasion, burglary, and more. Bryant was convicted of killing a 59-year-old woman whose throat was slashed during a robbery in 1976, and a 19-year-old woman who he raped, beat, strangled, and set on fire in 1977. Another woman was held at at knife point, robbed and raped in her home. Ultimately, Bryant was caught after breaking into another woman's house, robbing and raping her, but only to return 2 days later to rape that same victim, that same woman again. This victim was able to call the police and also identified Bryant, as did the other living victims. By the time he was apprehended, he had committed 2 brutal and heinous murders and 5 violent rapes in the Lakeview and Edgewater areas of the city of Chicago. One of the sentencing judges sentenced Bryant to 500 to 1,500 years for just one of the murders he committed. And the judge said at that time that he wanted to send a message to future parole boards that Bryant should never be released. Another sentencing judge, Judge Earl Strayhorn, stated that Bryant should only be released from prison in a coffin. On July 14, 2020, J.B. Pritzker's Prisoner Review Board voted to release him back into the public against the wishes of the victims and their families. He is now a free man. Paul Bryant is a free man walking the streets. Ray Larson, a man convicted of murdering a child and also convicted of deviant sexual behavior, made headlines last year, just days after being released by the Prisoner Review Board. He absconded from the state, violating the terms of his parole and becoming a fugitive. It wasn't the first time that Larson had proven himself a risk. In May of 1972, on a 3-day furlough from prison where he was serving time for home invasion and robbery. Larson entered the home of an elderly woman with a gun and sexually assaulted her. Following the assault, he went to Schiller Woods Forest Preserve in Cook County looking for someone to shoot when he came across 16-year-old Frank Casolari, who was fishing, a 16-year-old high school student from Prosser High School in Chicago. Larson shot Casolari 23 times and left his naked body in the woods. Larson was caught the next day in a stolen vehicle with an underage girl who had been missing overnight. In a Sun-Times interview, it was revealed that Larson had threatened the Casolari family as well while in prison. Ultimately, Larson was released by J.B. Pritzker's Prisoner Review Board on May 13, 2021, over the objection of the Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul, whose office tried to delay the decision for 90 days so he could be evaluated as a possible sexually violent person. Ultimately, the PRB had to rescind Larson's parole after he left the jurisdiction of Illinois in violation of the terms of his parole. Johnny Veal. Johnny Veal is a cop killer. In July of 1970, Chicago Police Sergeant James Severin and Chicago Police Officer Anthony Rosado had been assigned to the Cabrini Green housing complex after volunteering for the Walk and Talk community outreach program, which aimed to reduce crime in the Cabrini Green projects. On July 17th, Severin and Rosado were murdered in cold blood while crossing a baseball field across from the complex as part of a coordinated sniper attack planned and executed by a local gang. Johnny Veal was a triggerman and played an integral part of planning and carrying out this attack on law enforcement and bragged about his involvement in these murders to rival gangs. Testifying before the Prisoner Review Board, Sergeant Severin's nephew said he would remember his uncle saying how much he loved working with the local kids at that baseball field, and then being brutally murdered on the same field the following week. Even Cook County State's Attorney Kim Fox voiced opposition to Veal's parole, calling the officer's murders a cold-blooded execution, while also pointing out that Veal bragged about the crimes. Again, J.B. Pritzker's Prisoner Review Board voted to release Veal on February 21st, 2021. He is now out on the streets. He is a free man. Johnny Veal, a cop killer of 2 Chicago police officers, is a free man. These are just three specific cases. Horrible cases, but they tell you everything you need to know. In each one of these cases, a victim or their family publicly stated their strenuous opposition to the parole of each one of these. Doesn't that victim or the family member have any say? Shouldn't they be afforded greater weight in a parole decision? Each one of these former inmates have one thing in common. They are cold-blooded killers who should have never lived a free day after their conviction and sentence. These monsters are the true faces of evil. We can't allow this to continue unchecked. Violent career criminals being given their freedom back after they took so much from their victims and their families. J.B. Pritzker and his administration have failed, which is why I have filed this morning House Bill 5126, which I hope will help fix this tragedy, which the governor and his administration and his Prisoner Review Board have allowed to happen. The governor's Prisoner Review Board needs reform, and this is how I propose to do it. First, the bill codifies the mission of the Prisoner Review Board so victims will not be forgotten. That new mission statement says as follows. The Prisoner Review Board is to protect the rights of victims of crime, their families, and the citizens of Illinois by ensuring that the rule of law is upheld and justice is carried out. The board has the responsibility to give voice to the victims, their family members, the public safety officials when an inmate situation is being reviewed. Also, the board shall award significant weight to the statements and positions of the victims and family members in their parole recommendations. My legislation will also require 5 members of the board to have actual experience in law enforcement, as law enforcement officers or prosecutors. And for more transparency, I am going to make the en banc hearings, that is the full board hearings when they make recommendations and vote for parole, to be available for live viewing. The bill reforms how parole hearings are being held by requiring a higher vote threshold for parole of people convicted of first-degree murder. The current law only requires a simple majority. For first-degree murder, I am asking the board to have a 2/3 vote of the entire board for a granting of parole for first-degree murder. And it outlines who may present testimony at the parole hearing. 1 representative of the person under consideration for parole, 1 representative of law enforcement from the county of conviction, 1 family member of each victim. Now, the governor now has the right to deny, the governor now, under this bill, has the right to deny the decisions of the Prisoner Review Board to release an inmate on parole or to revoke their parole or aftercare release in cases of first-degree murder. These decisions will now be made available to the public. It also changes clemency hearings by requiring the board to give victims registered with the board written notice of the application for clemency within 7 days of the filing of the application. If the victim does not file a witness statement 30 days prior to the clemency hearing date, the board shall send a second notice to the victim. The victim can ask for an extension of 45 days to submit their statement. If an extension is requested, the board cannot proceed with the hearing until the extension has expired. But more important, the board's report to the governor is no longer confidential and shall be made available to the public. That's extremely important. The state of Illinois must change. The administration is placing criminals above victims, and we are trying to silence, and they are trying to silence the voices of victims across the state. There is no reason that cold-blooded murderers are released back into society against the wishes of the people they hurt so profoundly. Governor Pritzker and his Prisoner Review Board gave Veal, Larson, and Bryant the second chance that the victims and loved ones will never get. Thank you.